And whatever it is that that child needed at that time, whatever protection, whatever defense, whatever that child needed, they lay there and they imagine that it's happening. And as I'm sitting there watching them do this in their mind, sometimes they're telling me what they're seeing and sometimes they don't. Either way, it's perfectly fine. But tears will flow out of their eyes almost every single time. And they're just meeting the need of that younger part of themselves. And I think when someone is able to do that, then they're able to find their way to the CEO chair.
Welcome, beautiful beings, to season 2 of the Cosmic Love Antenna podcast with your host, Harrison Ma. This podcast sets the loving intention of creating the mystical space needed to pull back the layers restricting health, alignment, and love. Now let's walk you home to your cosmic spiritual heart space. Before we continue this beautiful chat today, wonderful souls, I need to jump in here to share something really exciting. If you've been following these episodes or you've been following me on social media, you know that I am in the process of releasing my first book, Your Cosmic Love Antenna, Define, Embody, and Emit Your Unique Frequency of Love. And at the time of this episode release, pre-orders are now open. If you have been pulled to this show, if you're looking to understand the what, the how, and the why of love, if you're looking to apply some of the tools connected to your chakras, inner child, releasing religious trauma, ancestral healing, emotional release, and so much more, then this beautiful expression from my heart to yours is for you. If you are looking to channel more of your unique gifts and the divine frequency that you are, these pages will open all of this up. And if you're interested, all you need to do is go to cosmicloveantenna.com. That's cosmicloveantenna.com. And you can pre-order this book right now. If you pre-order, click on that link, put in your email, you're going to get access to some special gifts that I'm only offering to those who get in before I release it fully. These gifts are going to be some more channeled meditations, activations, and some other surprises from my heart to yours. So head over to cosmicloveantenna.com, pre-order this beautiful expression, and I can't wait to hear how it shifts your life. If you're listening to this after pre-order sales, that same link can be also used to go to the direct purchase link. Sending love, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of this episode today. And I'm really excited to talk about the topic of internal family systems. Before we dive into it, just a reminder for all the new listeners, the tribe that's continuing to tune in. If you get a bit of value out of this conversation today, please share this out to friends, family members, lovers that you feel it can bring some guidance to. You can always go over to Apple and Spotify as well and leave your feedback, comments, and love over there. That helps the show, that helps me, that helps the guest reach more beautiful hearts that might need this discussion today. With that, I want to introduce the beautiful Dana here today. Dana is a psychotherapist. She's a clinical psychologist. She is the Sassy Psychotherapist, and I can't wait to hear the story about that one. And she is a beautiful, lovely heart. We're going to get into all things internal family systems today. I'm going to be interviewing her and asking her about how this impacts trauma healing, how this impacts our internal dynamics, what are the tools, boundaries, where does love come in? And also I'm going to be going a bit deeper into the mental and spiritual connection. With all of that, Dana, welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna.
Harrison, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about all these topics and to be with you and your listeners. This is going to be wonderful.
It's a pleasure, my friend. And I know it's your weekend where you are, and I'm really grateful that I get to wake up in the morning and spend this time with you. So with that love, I think, Dana, where I would like to start before we get into all things family systems, I want to hear a little bit about you. And I think the most obvious question to ask, maybe it's not obvious, but to me it's obvious, is the moniker that you have of the Sassy psychotherapist or the Sassy therapist. Where I have to ask, where does that come from, my friend?
Oh my goodness. That comes from my personality, in that I have a way where I just say things because I figure why not? And I'm all about transparency and truth, and saying it with love and respect, but just I feel like we need to talk about stuff. I'm not one of those people that's going to sit in the corner and think something but not say it. I'm just going to say it. And people over my lifetime have gotten kind of alarmed by some of the things that I would say, but I'm like, you're thinking it. Don't act like you're not thinking it. We might as well just say it so we can have a conversation about it. And that way, even if someone has, disagreements or they don't think the same, that's okay. That's okay. Let's talk about it. Let's get it out there and say it. So I just speak my mind. I'm very direct, and that's kind of where that came from.
So I love it. And it brings up another question that I have to ask, because so what I'm hearing you say is that you're speaking from the heart, right? You're speaking straight from a term that I often teach about is the story gap, right? And your story gap is the difference between what is the truth inside of you and what is the truth that you're actually deciding to share with the world, right? And the bigger that gap, the more dysfunction, dis-ease, and challenge that arises. And it sounds like your gap is very small, if not non-existent. So my question, my friend, is, has this got you in trouble, right, with the work that you do? Because you're a clinical psychologist, so I can imagine that sometimes when you're maybe in a setting and you're supporting and helping someone, has that ever gotten you into troubled water?
No, because as a therapist, we're supposed to use our thoughts and feelings as part of the therapeutic process. And so I can give you one example. I remember a ways back, I had a patient who had ADHD, and every time I started to say something, she interrupted me and talked over the top of me. And I tolerated this for a while. And then I went, like maybe 10 minutes, maybe in the session. And then I said, are you aware that every time I speak, you talk right over the top of me? And I said, I'm sitting here feeling a little frustrated with you right now. But in therapy, it's very important for me. And I tell my patients this: we observe, we don't judge. So we can observe our own behavior. We can observe other people's behavior. It's important to observe it. So we're not denying it. We're observing it because it's real. So we might as well call a spade, but we don't need to judge it. Because when we judge ourselves or we're judging somebody else, that leads us down a bad path. And so I'm telling my patient, so she has already heard my spiel about, I'm not going to judge you, but I'm going to be direct. I say, so you know what? I'm feeling a little annoyed right now because every time I try to say something, you speak right over the top of me. I said, are you aware that you do that? And she just kind of cocked her head to the side and looked at me, and she said, I never really thought about it before, but I guess I do. And I said, I can guarantee you do that with other people in your life. They're just not telling you. I'm going to tell you. Because it's a safe place to be able to say, this is what I'm feeling. This is what's going on. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy. So thank you for that beautiful story. That's a wonderful example. And it lines true, right? I explain it I teach a lot about the chakra system, and people listening in have probably heard me speak about the throat chakra a lot. And this is one of the biggest limitations through healing that we have, is that most of us have trauma connected to using our voice, right? So when we go to speak our voice, we feel like we're going to be abandoned or rejected or hurt again, so we don't speak. But then there's that belief that when we speak, people are going to react badly. Like in your situation, many people wouldn't have spoke the thing because they would have been worried about how that person would have perceived them based off what you spoke. But your situation, your example, not only did your client not react badly, she was actually open to more information. She was open to more, tell me more, right? And I've observed that that's more the norm than the worst case scenario. Have you found that, my friend? Have you seen that?
Yes, when you're approaching someone in a loving way And they feel that from you. They feel from you that you're not judging them. They feel from you that you're not attacking them. You just have a curiosity. You just have an observation, and you're just sharing it with them. And you want the best for them, and they feel that from you. And when that's the case, they're much more open to hearing what you have to say. Mm-hmm.
The key word is loving there. The key word is if you set that as the intention and then speak, right? We feel that. We feel that frequency. So I think this is a beautiful segue into family systems here now. Let's just set the foundation to go deeper. How would you explain to someone that's new to internal family systems, what's a definition for the beginner? How do you explain it to someone that's new to this framework?
Okay. And I'm going to explain that, but if I could, I want to make a brief comment on something that you said earlier about the chakras and the throat, because we're talking about traumas. You know, something interesting that I've noticed in quite a few patients of mine over the years, that when they were trying to talk about their traumas, they start coughing, they start clearing their throat, like they'll start going sort of like they have a sore throat when they weren't doing that before. But then when they start talking about their trauma, all of a sudden they're trying to look for a lozenge to suck on to, they're just constantly clearing their throat. And I find that really interesting, given what you just said about the throat chakras. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could go off on a whole chakra conversation there, but it's real. It's real, Dana. I'm happy that you see that, because it's not just the throat, right? It's the sinking in the solar plexus, it's the tightening in the heart chakra, it's the tingles in the third eye that come up in certain situations, right? This is, for people listening, if this is intriguing you, I'd definitely go back and listen to, I'll put it in the show notes, the chakra episode breakdowns where I've talked about this, because it adds another layer of nuance to when you are doing trauma healing, like Dana's beautifully highlighting. If you can understand the role of the throat chakra within the expression, then you can sort of, that's what's happening. And then you could lean in a little bit more. So, love it.
And I'm going to kind of ping off your words, lean in. I love that, because I use that with my patients so much, because people so often, rather than leaning into their discomfort or their pain or their issues, rather than leaning in where they can face it and feel it and process it, they're avoiding it. They're trying to deny it or lean away from, and they'll use alcohol. They'll use working excessively. They will use sex. They'll use excessive spending, all kinds of things to try to not lean into that very thing that they need to. And until someone's ready to do that, they're not going to make a lot of progress emotionally, and especially dealing with traumatic issues.
I think a way to frame that, helping them see that, because it's often fear, right? The reason they're numbing and not doing that leaning in is because they're fearful of what will happen. And I've found that a way to frame this, and maybe you've observed this too, is really seeing that fear as the beautiful treasure that it is, right? My favorite quote around this is from the beautiful Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell states that the cave that we fear to enter holds the treasures that we seek. So it's within that moment when that fear comes up, it's helping that person feel safe enough to see that this fear, one, it's most likely 99% of the time it's an illusion, but not only is it an illusion, it's the gateway to more of your healing, more of your gaining something from the situation, etc. Right?
Yes. And someone doesn't have to do everything all at once. They can take small bites. And what I've said before, and I know I've kind of veered away from internal family systems. We're going to get back to that because I love it, and I can talk about it so much, and I will. But it's, I liken it to someone saying, I say, if you've been laying in the sun and your skin is very, very warm and you want to cool down, well, you go to get in the pool, But when you first get in, it's very cold and you kind of jerk back from it because your skin is so warm from the sun. But if you're walking down the steps, then you walk in a couple of steps, and what do? Do you jump back out of the pool? No, you stand there and let your skin habituate to this new temperature. And once your legs have habituated, then you can walk a couple more steps in and up to your abdomen. And then that's feeling really, really cold on your abdomen. So you stop and you wait for your abdomen to get used to that new temperature. And then you do that. And that's kind of how you can process what you're afraid of. It doesn't have to be all at once, and you don't have to run away. Yes, it is uncomfortable, but if you just stop and you lean into it and you wait, give your body, give your mind, give your heart a chance to process it, then you can keep going.
It's often a person outside of us that helps us through that waiting, right? It's often the psychotherapist, the coach, the intuitive, the healer, whoever you're working with, that often can help us with that waiting process, right? So I say that for people listening, you don't have to do this alone, right? This is why, yes, I think we're powerful spiritual beings that have all the potential in the world, but we're also human beings that work really well in connection with other people, right? Let's get into family systems, because this is all wonderful, and I think this applies beautifully to this work. So let's go back to the definition, and then let's dive a little bit deeper into all the different layers. So can you please explain from your experience, your perspective, what is internal family systems?
Okay, well, internal family systems is a way of thinking, a way of understanding that was created by Richard Schwartz. And I'm trying to think when he started this. It was several decades ago. And you have the official protocol where there's things like, and I'll explain this as we go along, exiles and managers and firefighters, but basically in a nutshell, it's saying that we have different parts of ourself. We have essentially a family inside our own head. You have different members in there. And what I use internal family systems for with my patients is to help them to accept that they have different parts of themselves and to love each part rather than trying to kill a part or hate on a part, that they can acknowledge that part of themselves and learn to accept it and manage it and not let it take over, but that we do have different parts. Now, when I say different parts, I'm not talking about, someone that has, yes, we're not talking about dissociative identity disorder. We're not talking about that. That's when there's a fracture. And I've had a patient that actually had that. It's very interesting.
Can you distinguish between these two, my friend? Because you read my mind. This is probably the most common question that I get when explaining this sort of internal group. How do we know if we're connecting to a part of our internal family system versus having that disorder? How do you distinguish between it?
Well, in some cases, there's some gray, okay, because there's a spectrum with everybody. But in general, when you're talking about dissociative identity disorder, there is, like I mentioned earlier, there's a fracture. Usually their parts are not aware of each other. For example, someone could show up in the emergency room and they call it waking up. They'll say, I woke up and I was sitting on a gurney in the emergency room and I looked down at the armband that I had on my arm and it had a name on it that I did not know. So another part of them had come in, had gone through something and had come into the ER and then had gotten them situated and safe in the ER and then went back. And then sometimes you have like the host part coming forward, but largely there's a disconnect between them and they're totally different. Like one part could be Well, the parts are different in internal family systems. The parts are different as well, but but there's a cohesion.
There's an understanding of the connections. It makes explaining it beautifully. It's making total sense to me. And I think that that word there is, I get a lot of images when I'm on the show and I'm hearing you speak, and it's almost like I'll just use this example for people that have experienced alcohol, and maybe you've experienced excessive alcohol drinking, and you're having like the blacking in and out, and you're sort of in different spaces and unaware of the time that's elapsed and what's happened before. It's kind of like that, and you don't understand the relationship and the connection and how you've got there. The question that bubbles up around this, my friend, that I think I can feel probably a lot of people listening might have, within the family system that you're starting to describe, what are some examples of different members? So, for example, I speak a lot about on the show the inner child. Would the inner child be one of those members?
Oh, 100%. And we can say inner children. Well, okay, let me give you one example. So there was a fellow who every time he went to try something new at work, these messages kept coming into his mind. We'll call them intrusive thoughts. They kept intruding into his mind saying, you can't do that. You're too stupid. You're going to make a fool of yourself. Just stop right now. Just do what you know how to do. Stop trying to think you can do something new, because you can't. You're going to embarrass yourself. Well, he went through this enough until he was about to lose his job. And so he went to a therapist, and they just started investigating the origin of this message, this voice that kept coming. It wasn't like an outside voice. It was an intrusive thought of his own. What he discovered was that the voice sounded strikingly like his dad, that sometime along the way, when he was about 8 or 9, he has this traumatic memory of his dad saying these things to him. Boy, you can't do that. You're not smart enough to do that. You just need to stick with what you know. You're going to be an embarrassment to me. You're going to be an embarrassment to the family. Stop thinking you can try these new things because you're not smart enough. You can't do it. Well, so he has a member of his family that is his 8 or 9-year-old self, who is still very much believing that voice. Now, I need to point out here that our traumatic self resides in a part of our brain called the amygdala and the hippocampus, and it has no sense of time. And what that means is when that part of ourself gets triggered, it doesn't have the ability to say, so he's like 8 or 9 all over again. And that part of himself, now, interestingly enough, this is very important. These parts of us are actually trying to protect us. That younger version of himself is scared to death that he's going to make a fool of himself. So that younger version that was taught by the dad, you're not smart enough to do these new things, is trying as hard as it can to keep him from doing something new. Because in its mind, because it's still, as far as it's concerned, we're all still 8 or 9.
That's worried about the father.
Mm-hmm. And we can't, those younger selves don't have the ability to realize, well, that was 20 years ago. Because that's logic, that's reasoning. And those parts of our mind, the traumatic parts, don't process time. They're stuck.
Oh, you're getting into a whole field here. A question I'm going to ask you in a bit is connected to that love piece of loving these internal parts. But we'll come back to that, because I just want to point out something. This non-linear passage of time that exists in the brain parts that you were describing also doesn't exist when we start doing the deeper love work, right? Maybe you've experienced this, my friend, but on the show I speak a lot about the spiritual nature of the heart, right? And when we go into the heart space from a mystical spiritual lens, the deeper that we go, the without getting off into a big tangent here, the deeper we realize that the past and the future all fold into the present within the sort of quantum view of it all. So I point that out for people listening. This is not just a brain thing that Dana's talking about. It's also a heart thing. And when we start getting into the love of it all, that love knows no time either, right? So it just like the trauma and the challenge can be disconnected from linear time, the solution and the love is disconnected from linear time. So it's just a nice little connection there. Dana, you've already started explaining it, but I guess the sort of what I want to go a bit deeper into here now is how can we start bringing balance and healing to the parts of our family system that are traumatized or are challenged? So the example that you gave was that little child that has that belief and that story that's playing in the background. What are the first steps? So if someone recognizes this, how can we start to heal that part of our family system?
This is where internal family systems and inner child work crisscross. And so before I answer your question, I'm going to kind of set up a scenario. When I have my patients begin to understand about internal family systems, I ask them to create a boardroom. Now, once they get the understanding of it, they can be anywhere. I said, you can be out in a field, I don't care. But in a boardroom, I said, who sits at the front? Who sits at the head of the table? And they're like, well, the CEO. I said, yeah, okay. Who sits down the sides of the table? And they say, well, usually the VPs or something like that have reports that they're bringing. I said, this is good. So what would you imagine if there was a boardroom and all the VPs came and offered information that was 20 or 30 years old? What would happen to the corporation? They're like, well, it would fail. I'm like, this is true. So imagine that you have a boardroom in your mind and you are the CEO, and along down the table, on both sides of the table, are all these different parts of yourself that each hold their own trauma or their own message. It doesn't necessarily always have to be negative either. And I can give you an example of that here in just a moment, kind of a funny example. But I said, so being aware of that, I said, at the end of the day, we're responsible for managing those parts. So in answer to your question, if someone has a younger part, like an 8-year-old boy that is sitting there in his chair at the table, and he's so scared that, the man is going to do something and it's just going to go all to pieces because he said, we're not smart enough to do that. We're going to embarrass ourselves. Stop. So I would ask the person, what does that part of you need? Really stop and tune in to that part of yourself. And I ask my patient, about how old does that part of you feel? And surprisingly enough, most of the time they don't hesitate. They're like, oh, it's about 8, or it feels about 12. I mean, they know, they don't have to think very long.
Dana, can I ask a question around that? Because this is something that I notice a lot. How often is that part a child in your experience? How, like, statistically, out of, and what I'm getting at here is that I've noticed that 99% of people's challenges can be connected back to childhood. I'm wondering, in your experience, how often are we noticing that these traumatized and triggered and challenged family systems are the inner children?
About 90% of the time. Mm-hmm. They can be older adolescents, but yeah, it's about 90% of the time it's a child.
Yeah, that was my feeling. Sorry, I interrupted you. Keep going.
No, I understand. So I would ask the patient to really kind of get a feel, just sit in the chair and identify. And I asked them to come up with a visual. I said, and I'll give that as an assignment. I said, take some time with this. Come back next week or the week next when I see you again. And I'd like for you to tell me, what does this part of you look like? And I said, keep in mind this, if you are a natal female, natal male, whatever. This part of you doesn't have to match that. It can be cross-gender. It doesn't even have to be human. I actually have a part in my boardroom that's not human. And I can tell you about that here in just a minute.
Well, can I ask about it now? Because you've intrigued me. Said this is your this is your family system, and
yes,
it's not
mine.
So explain it. What does it look like?
It's a velociraptor.
Ooh, why have you talked to this raptor? Why is it in that form?
Because, and this was not a childhood thing, but an adult thing, I had to have a head MRI done a few years ago. And I realized that I must have some claustrophobia. And I climbed out of that machine 3 times. And I'm not naturally a very anxious person, but panic just overtook me. It's hard to describe panic because I'm a very logical, reasonable person. Panic cares not about your logic and reasoning. It totally tromps all over it, just stomps all over your logic. And to me, I had to get a feel for what does this panic feel like within myself? What kind of visual, what does it feel like? And to me, once I let myself take some time and really process that, I said, it feels like a velociraptor, like one of those cunning, remember the speedy, cunning ones from, what was that? Yes. And they were so fast and cunning, and that's what panic felt like to me. So I have a velociraptor in my boardroom that was born in there as an adult.
I love this. I love this, Dana. I'm just going to add something to this because this brings up a very interesting element here that we could add into family systems. And then I want to go back to what you're saying about the CEO meeting the needs because it's so important. I'm just going to add in a mystical, spiritual side to this. And we won't go too much into this because this is a whole conversation. But we know that there are very powerful mystical entities that we can engage with, right? That we can interact with. And I've spoken about this on the show, from angels to spirit guides to ancestors to spirit animals. And it would make sense to me that when you're looking into this internal family system, and I know that the raptor for you, my friend, is something that you conjured up to really symbolize that fear. But I think what we could also have, I'm just imagining the CEO table that you've set up. We could also have one of these mystical entities as one of these parts of our family system, right? Maybe not the CEO, but let's say that I connect to one of my ancestors and I connect to my grandmother who's passed away. She could come in and be in this table, and she could give me the power and the gifts that she has to help that maybe that inner child that feels abandoned and rejected, to then help that system, that connection heal with love. Does that resonate with you, my friend?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, my 100%. I love the fact that you brought that up. And I will give you another example from my own boardroom to kind of corroborate what you're saying and to support what you just said. I want people to know that your boardroom is something that you have some that are there from childhood, from their trauma based, but you can add, like you just said, you can pull in other parts that are helpful. Now, I have a part of myself that I realized that it's a guy, and he sits over on the right. I can see him right now. He sits on the right side of my table, and he has dark hair and it's all slicked back, and he looks like an IRS agent that's constipated. I mean, he has a white shirt that's buttoned all the way up, and he kind of sits all tense, and he has a pocket protector, and he always looks like he's constipated. His face is always all pinched up. But he's the part of me that, especially if I get working on something, that I feel like I have to cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and you have to learn more and do more and be more, and this isn't enough, and you're not enough, and you have to get, that's what that feels like to me. That's the visual that I had. And when I realized he was getting to be too much, I was getting out of balance. And this is a word I use a lot with my patients about balance. So yes, he's on my board and I see him there. I don't like him, but he's there. But he was getting too big and mouthy. And so I added a character that I actually pulled from a book that I read. Her name is Cece, and she's like probably in her 70s, and she has this long flowing white hair, except one big chunk of it is bright purple. And she walks around kind of like in a cloud of patchouli and a little bit of weed. And she wears Birkenstocks and has flowy robes like Stevie Nicks. And so she's on the left side of my table, and I love her because she looks at me, she goes, Dana, it's going to be fine, girl. Everything's good. Everything's going to be, just enjoy this journey. It's all going to work out just fine. And I need her so badly, and I love her so much. Well, sometimes when this guy, I haven't named him, he doesn't have a name because I don't like him. I just know what he looks like. And I said, Cece, can you please go over there and calm him down? Because he's getting a little bit too out of control over there. So she stands up. And when he sees her getting ready to walk around the table, he's like, oh my gosh, here comes Cece. And she walks around the table, and she just wraps her long robes around him and just swings him back and forth, grabs him around the shoulders and just rocks him back and forth. And eventually she calms him down. So to your point, we can add different in there to love on and to support and comfort and reassure those other parts of ourselves that really are afraid or very anxious or need just some touch, need some physical touch, or they need a kind word. I had a patient one time that he had a part of himself that was starved for affirmation. It was a younger part of himself that was starved for someone to just pat him on the back and say, good job. You did a good job. I mean, he started crying when he was talking about this. And so I said, what can you do to that part of yourself? What does that part of yourself need? And he looked at me and he says, well, he needs somebody to hug him and pat him on the back and tell him that he's okay, that he did a good job. And I said, take a moment right now, close your eyes, go into your boardroom and see that happening. Feel it happening. And he did. And you could just see the tears just rolling down his face.
So it's, first of all, I love your beautiful example, my friend. And it's just, it's showing the power of our imagination. But it's also showing something very important here. And you connected to it right at the end with the feeling element. I'm a big fan of, do you know who Greg Braden? Are you familiar with Greg Braden, my friend? Do you know who Greg Braden is?
I'm not.
I'd recommend you look into him and read his books. And for people out there, I just did an episode of the show talking on the power of creation energy and manifestation and abundance. And it really highlights what we're talking about here, that everything we see in the external world outside of us is a secondary, meaning that everything is created first inside of us, right? So the reason that your client, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but I'll just explain this for people listening, the reason that we can imagine that experience in our mind and have that interaction with our family board members and then have an emotional release and a feeling release, it's because that image in your head is just as real as if it was happening in the external world, right? It first begins inside. And when we add, thoughts, emotions, and feelings together, right, that is creation energy. That is how we not just heal, but how we expand and how we connect to the things that we want to bring into our world, right? So I love it. We could go into another manifestation talk there, but Dana, I want to go back to the CEO, and the reason I want to talk about this part of the family system is this is the, if you want to use some words here, the integrated adult, or it's the heart space, or it's maybe if you want to get super spiritual, it's the God essence or the divinity inside of us. When someone's trying to create that CEO that's meeting the needs of the parts of the system that need support, what if, and I'm tuning into my audience, what if you've spent so much time in the fight or flight state or the traumatized state or the triggered state, you don't know what that integrated adult or that CEO looks like. How do we create that space that's going to meet the needs? Does that question make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. I actually had one patient one time. I asked her what her boardroom looked like. And I asked her where she was in there. And she said, Dana, I'm under the table. She said, it's mass mayhem in here. I am under the table. I don't even know how to get into that CEO chair. And everyone is running around like crazy, hanging from the light fixture. She says, I don't know what's going on in here. It's a crazy place.
I think a lot of people can relate to that example, myself included.
I appreciated her honesty so much, but it's like when you provide that place where there's no judgment, people feel very comfortable to just tell you exactly what they're thinking, which that's the best way. And I think really, in order to feel more comfortable and to pull out of that repetitive sensation of fight or flight, the trauma has to be addressed. It's like the elephant in the room. It has got to be addressed. And I do something that I think is just, the process is just beautiful. It's the inner child work. And you had said earlier, you mentioned spirit animals and such. And first of all, I want to talk about imaginal exposure. And because I'm going to kind of bring all this around, but imaginal exposure is kind of what we're talking about when you get the imagery in your mind. And for someone that might say, Dana, really, I mean, you're just making stuff up. It doesn't have any impact. I'm like, oh, really? So when you're sitting in a movie theater and you're watching a super, super scary movie and your heart is pounding and you don't even want to look at the screen, you're covering your eyes, you're kind of breaking out in a little bit of sheen of sweat, you're grabbing on to whoever's next to you. Do you feel all that in your body? I said, do you realize technically all you're doing is looking at pixels on a screen? None of that you're looking at you are in a room, in a chair, looking at a screen. That's what's technically happening. But in your imagination, you are being imaginally exposed to all of this, and it creates all of this the somatic response. So that is really, really key because people live it. I sit there and watch them live it. But when you do inner child work, it's very important to keep people calm. You must keep their heart rates low. You must keep their heart rates calm because it's okay to be in what I call the orange zone. You're a little bit uncomfortable, but you're still okay. But if you start approaching what I call the red zone, we've got to take it down because that's when you flip into fight or flight. So the spirit animal, this is something that Courtney Armstrong, she does a lot of trauma work and she's just amazing. And she was teaching about identifying an animal or a place that makes you feel safe, that you can call on, that when you start doing that inner child work and you're having to face this trauma that scares you so badly, that when that happens and you feel yourself kind of in that orange zone, that you can imagine your spirit animal right there with you. I had one patient, her spirit animal was a huge lion. And she said, as soon as she started feeling scared, she imagined that lion right next to her. And she put her arm across its back. It was huge. And she said she could feel it breathing. She could feel the lungs expanding and going in and out. She could feel the soft fur. And she just like tucked behind that big mane. It was a male lion. And she just tucked behind that soft mane and just got all comfortable and felt safe. And when you're doing inner child work, the person can stay there as long as they need to. They can stop the work in that session, or they can decide, okay, I'm calm now and I can continue doing this. But here's the key with inner child work. It is going back, finding that inner child and giving them what he or she needed then, but it wasn't provided. We get to do that now. And sometimes the person imagines themselves doing it for their inner child, but sometimes they don't feel secure enough to do that, and that's okay. They can imagine someone else doing it, and they can pick anybody they want. And they imagine that person being right there, and whatever it is that that child needed at that time, whatever protection, whatever defense, whatever that child needed, they lay there and they imagine that it's happening. And as I'm sitting there watching them do this in their mind, and sometimes they're telling me what they're seeing, and sometimes they don't. Either way, it's perfectly fine. But tears will flow out of their eyes almost every single time. It just flows out of their eyes, and they're laying down usually. So, it's flowing out sideways out of their eyes, and they don't even notice. And they're just meeting the need of that younger part of themselves. And I think when someone is able to do that, then they're able to find their way to the CEO chair.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. You brought that around beautifully, my friend. Well done. So a few things here bubbled up. First of all, I'm so happy that you just outlined and really affirmed the inner child work, because regular listeners of this show, I've done many episodes on the podcast about the inner child healing. It's a big part of my work. So for new listeners, I'm going to put a list of all the inner child episodes I've done in the show notes. My favorite inner child quote that you might be familiar with that really highlights what you're saying is from Alice Little, right? And Alice Little states that as traumatized children, we always wished someone would come and save us. We never imagined it would be us as adults. And it's really exactly what you just said, right? It's meeting that need and just in your mind's eye and just feeling it being released in the body. But I want to go back to what you said about the safety piece. And I want to connect it back to the chakras, because we talked about it with the throat, right? And this, again, for my listeners that are very energetically chakra based, this is why the root center, the root chakra, is root number one, right? It is root for safety, security, and support, right? And the energy in the chakra system can't flow upwards, right, to our sacral, sensitive, emotional, our solar plexus power, our heart love, our throat expression, if that foundation of safety, support, and security is not there, right? So it's, again, just affirming Dana's point here of we must tick that safety, security, and support box if we want to start this inner journey, right? And I'm not saying that none of it can be done, but it's definitely emphasized, right? If that support, safety, security is here. And maybe, Dana, I'll get your thoughts on this, and I have another question I want to jump to. But remembering that, yes, we want to get to the point where we can give that safety, support, and security to ourselves. But initially, it can be done with another, right? It can be done with the therapist. It can be done with the coach. It can be done with someone that we love that provides that container so we can shift and then go inwards. Do you agree with that, my friend?
Yes, 100%. Because they're usually, the patient is so scared. We're scared dealing with this, and they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to get around it, but the ability they have within themselves. All I do, I just kind of guide. I just sort of say, I explain kind of the process, but they do the whole thing. It's a beauty to watch. I express to them, I'm going to read this little script I read and kind of get you going back in time or whatever. But I don't know where you need to go. I don't know what time. I don't know where. And I said, I'm telling you right now, I have learned over time that your mind will take you exactly where you need to go. And if we do this and there's nothing, you don't really go anywhere in particular, then that's just your mind saying not today, which that's perfectly fine. We're going to receive that information and say your mind's going, you're just not ready today, and that's okay. And I want you to be assured that if your mind knows that you're not ready, it will not show you something that you are not ready to receive.
That's a big one, right? Mm-hmm. We all need to hear that, because I call it getting stuck in the superhero archetype, right? When we start the healing journey, we need to feel like we're healing, we're doing the things all the time. And if we get a stop or don't go any further, or you're not ready, then we feel like we're not doing the thing, we're not healing, but it cannot be further from the truth, right? The step that we need to take is the one that's right in front of us. And sometimes that step is just being and waiting for a second, right? Dana, I want to shift now a little bit because I actually want to take this a bit deeper. And the reason I actually wanted to do this conversation initially is because while I don't teach about internal family systems, I actually teach about something called the group consciousness. And it's actually the same thing, but from a spiritual lens, right? And the group consciousness is all the aspects of self that we can connect to, that we can learn to heal, support, nourish, meet the needs like we've been talking about today. So I guess my question for you, Dana, is, and we talked about this a little bit in our pre-chat, where do you think in your experience, in your life, where does spirituality come into the family system? Where do you think either, positive and loving spiritual practices and or maybe, religious trauma or spiritual trauma that we've experienced, how does that play a role within the family system conversation that we've had today?
Well, I think, unfortunately, it's not uncommon that people have had negative religious experiences along the way, and those voices tend to be rather rigid and critical. And it's a hurt. Because they're searching for that connection with God, with a spiritual connection. And it's like we said in the pre-chat that we did, I'm a Christian and, have a very strong faith. It's a very strong part of who I am. And I'm about loving people and just love them, just meet them where they are and just love them. Who we are not to judge. I'm huge with that. But within internal family systems, I think people, and I've heard this in my office so many times, people have gone through situations where other human beings have been nasty to them in the guise of religion, spirituality, but usually more religion, which is just the human rules that humans have made, and sometimes that part of themselves is in the boardroom. But I will say, I'll give you a personal example for me. Once in a blue moon, the boardroom just gets too much. There's just too much going on. And I will just kind of let my mind flow in what it wants to do. And there was one time I just felt myself wanting to walk out of the boardroom. And I did. I got out of my CEO chair and I just walked out and I opened the door and I walked into a hallway. It was empty. There was no one there. And I closed the door behind me. And as I leaned up against the wall and I felt a presence to my left and I looked over there and it felt like that was Christ standing there with me in the hallway. And he was just there with me. We were just standing there together, and I felt from him like, it's okay, Dana, you're good. It's okay. I will stand here with you in the silent hallway as long as you want. And that was so peaceful to me and I just stood there and I could kind of hear some stuff going on in the boardroom. I didn't care at that moment. I just had it. I'd had as much as I could take of managing all those parts. Yeah. And so I just wanted to stand in the hallway.
I love, it's so funny that this example's come up, my friend, because I'm actually going to assert here that what you experienced in your case with Jesus is not a Dana thing. And what I mean by this is a big part of this internal family system in many ways is coming back to your divinity, right? And in your example of you opening that door and connecting with Jesus and Christ, for you, I'm sure, right? I'm putting words in your mouth and you can let me know if this resonates. That didn't just feel good, right? That reminded you of something powerful inside of you, right? That that Jesus wasn't obviously outside of you. It was an internal, conversation, relationship that you had. But I'm sure within that interaction, it made you feel a certain way, right? It made you feel very powerful, very strong, connected. And I just want to encourage people listening that this is something we can all access, right? And we might have different versions of it, right? Some of it we might be seeing the Buddha, we might be seeing, Allah, we might be seeing, it doesn't matter, because the essence of it is the divinity that's inside of us, right? Is that God essence that's inside of us. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, does this resonate with you, my friend? Does this connect?
It does 100%. And I think getting back to the visual that we were talking about before, I think whatever their faith belief is, whatever their spirituality is, trying to create a visual of it is so helpful. Like into my example, when I went into the hallway and I looked over and I could kind of see a visual of Christ beside me. Of course, this whole thing was happening in my mind, obviously. So he's in me. And so it's kind of, but it's really helpful for an individual to have that visual. And like I mentioned to you before, the boardroom is just kind of a place to begin, just so that people can sort of understand the roles of, you kind of need to be in charge so you can manage, things, but it can be out in a field. It can be on a beach. It can be in a warehouse. It can be anywhere that resonates with you. But there does need to be, at the end of the day, there does need to be someone kind of in charge. Now, let me take a moment, if I could, and I'm going to veer over to the technical internal family system, talking about exiles and managers and firefighters, because I think you'll really be interested. So basically, we have the tender parts of ourselves, the wounded parts of ourselves that we're trying to hide from other people, and sometimes hide from ourselves. Those are called the exiles. Well, we have a part of our self called the manager. Now, the manager is the one that kind of gets in front of the exile. So when you're dealing with someone and you feel like something's kind of off, like you feel like you're not really connecting with because I have a very, very...
Is this an external person, dealing with an external person, or an internal?
Yes, okay, external. Yeah, when you're dealing with another external person, I am very, very acutely aware when I am accessing something that's a veneer. And so lots of times when you're talking with someone and I'm picking that up, like I'm talking with them, but I'm not getting the authentic person. There's something that they're putting up in front of us, in between us. That would be a manager. The manager is the one that stands in front of the exile so that other people can't see the tender bits, because the manager doesn't want other people to see that. And so frequently when you're interacting with individuals, that's what you're getting. It feels kind of stiff. It feels kind of superficial.
It sounds like an ego mask. What you're talking about is a persona that we put on to fit into a certain situation. And
yes.
And it also sounds like, because these are all words, but what I'm resonating here with is the parts. What did you call the exiles? The exiles are our shadow aspects, shadow work. Is that a connection there, my friend?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those parts of ourselves that we're
repressed.
Yes. That we may not even be aware of. Yeah. That we may be scared of ourselves, but it's the wounded parts that we don't want out there. And then you have the firefighters. So the firefighters come flying in whenever the manager hasn't been able to really do a very good job. The exile is getting ready to be exposed. So the firefighter comes flying in, and usually the behavior that somebody exhibits when a firefighter is in charge seems dysfunctional. Like they might be just screaming and hollering. They might be drinking excessively. They might be using sex excessively. They might be doing all of these things, but it's like this huge, it's sort of like, look at all of this stuff. It's kind of a histrionic kind of demonstration. Look at all this stuff. And while you're looking at all this stuff, guess what you're not looking at? My exile. Because my exile is naked back here and cold and scared and trembling. And I'm going to throw anything else out here for you to look at so you don't notice my wounded, naked, trembling exile that's just right back here. And so that would be the firefighter when the manager has lost control.
I love it. I love all these little these pieces of the system. And it's, I think, an important point to pull out of what you're highlighting here is that whether it's the exile, the firefighter, or the manager, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Dana, but they're usually activated in relationship with another person, right? So when we're interacting with my mom or my dad or my friend or my lover, they're being triggered and brought up in us through the reflection of them, right? So this is, going back to your point before of doing inner child work. Often the way that we can begin in a child walk or this internal family system work, same thing, is looking at our relationships, looking at how functional or most commonly dysfunctional they are, and where these pieces of our system are being activated based off the interactions we have. Is that a good way to analyze it?
Yes, that sounds very good. It's a lot about safety, and whoever we're interacting with, do we feel safe with them or do we not feel safe? And the level of safety will determine how much of a veneer, how much of a persona we need to put out there. And also, if we're with someone that we feel very protected by and understood by and not judged, we will let the exile. And when someone shares their exile with you, that's a really big deal. I mean, they have trusted you with something that's very, very precious. And they have allowed themselves to become very vulnerable to you whenever they have shared an exile with you, an exiled part. That's why the term exile was used, because we take those parts and we like throw them way, we exile them, on way far away. We don't want anyone, and sometimes we don't even want ourselves to acknowledge those parts. And so it's very interesting.
And then we project them. We project those exile parts onto the people outside of us, right? The people that we love the most, usually. Dana, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and you're as equally loving as you are brilliant in your mind. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing in the world. I have a couple more questions here before we finish, and before we get to the last question, I want to throw this one out at you, and if it's too much, please don't feel free. Like, you don't have to answer it, but it's just something that came up, actually bubbled up before when we were talking about the Jesus example. And it's another sort of spiritual part of this internal family system that I've noticed is a big roadblock that most of us run into, much like most of us have that inner child wound. Most of us have this wound, and it's the wound of our higher power being external or being internal. And what I mean by this is, in your example, you connected to Jesus and that Christ in you, and you acknowledged that power was in you. But I think for a lot of people, religious, spiritual, or otherwise, there are a lot of wounds around that power being something outside of us that we need to appeal to get, rather than it already being internal. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, one, in your experience, do you see this play a role in a lot of, whether it's the internal family feuds or, just healing and trauma in general?
I'm going to give you a personal answer to that question.
Please.
So I hear what you're saying. And for me personally, the knowing that God is not me He's in me. I feel him in me. He is in me, but he's not me. That brings me personally, everybody has a different story, and this is mine. That brings me so much comfort because I know what a screw up I can be. I know how stupid I can be. I know how much I don't know. I know how weak I can be. I know how thoughtless I can be. And so for me, there's a scripture that comes to mind about in my weakness, he is strong. And that brings me so much comfort. It brings me comfort as I do therapy. It brings me comfort as I do podcasting, because I say, you know what? I can't do this by myself. I know that, but you can. And I don't have to do it by myself. I can rely on you because I'm going to let go. And as I let go and surrender, you get to take over. And so it gives me so much warmth and encouragement, because if I thought that I personally had to know all the answers and figure it all out, that would freak me out. So it's nice to know that God is not me. He's in me, but he is not me.
There's a lot bubbling up there, but I think it's beautiful. Because I think we might have another conversation on this, Dana, because this is a whole little wormhole here. But what you just outlined there, right, and the solace that you gained from it, I've noticed a lot of people don't find that solace, right? And there's almost a unworthiness to receive. So let me explain it this way. It's almost like, well, let me hear your thoughts on this, and then we'll wrap it up, because I want to be mindful and respectful of your time. A lot of us are born feeling unworthy, right? I know in my story, I felt unworthy, right, from birth, and that's part of my inner child healing that have worked through and continue to move through in many ways. And I've acknowledged that, and it's kind of the opposite of what you're saying, that how I've come back to that worthiness is realizing, yes, I don't have all the answers, but if I start to pull back the layers and do certain kinds of healing, whether it's inner child work, whether it's the family systems, whether it's ancestral healing, a lot of different things, that the unworthiness was always just an illusion, that power, whether it's divinity, God, actual worthiness, was there the whole time. But what was different was there was some trauma, there was some wounds, there was some, highly, deeply a sympathetic state where I was being triggered all the time. And once that healing came back and we started to remove those layers, those answers came. So I'm not sure if there's a question in there, Dana, for you, but more of just a reflection. I'm wondering what bubbles up for you around that.
I really like the way you pointed out that, because it is true. Sometimes people, they come at it from a place of unworthiness, and they don't, it's really a very, very sore wound. But I guess if we're talking about God, our concept of God, and internal versus external, and if it's okay to talk something about personal, then I think when Jesus came, when he was human, he surprised everybody, because he went to the very people and to the very places that the Jews wouldn't go. The Jews were like, no, we can't go there because they're dirty, because they don't follow all the rules. No, we can't cross their threshold because they do nasty things. We don't agree with what they're doing. And Jesus, what did he do? He went exactly there. He crossed those thresholds. He sat down, he ate with them, he held them, he reached out to them. That's the Jesus that is with me, that I know, that he shocked everybody. All those people, he called the Pharisees, who were like the snooty preachers at the time, they prance around in all their fancy robes and do all their fancy prayers. And he called them whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones. That's what he called them. And he would go to the people, the ones that felt so unworthy. And those were the ones that he wanted to touch and reach. And he said, come, I love you, come. That's why I love him so much. And that's, that feeling of we can feel that worthiness through that, even if we can't from a human being. Like if we have these interactions with other people and they're telling us these messages, like, you're just not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not, you're not creative enough. We don't like you. These messages come from other people. It's like, what? Because we come out of the chute into a scenario with other human beings. So we're basically being raised by faulty humans who were also raised by faulty humans.
Yes.
And we get those messages coming at us. Yes. And so, and at some point we internalize those and think, well, they must be right. I must be unworthy, but that's not true. They're faulty humans. And that message was in error. They didn't know what they were saying.
I think I'm gonna have to bring you back for another conversation, Dana, because this is bringing up so much more here that I would love to dive into with you. But we do have to wrap it here. So I love you very much, my friend. Thank you for spending your time with me today. I hope this has given I know this has given me so much value, and I hope it's given people listening just as much. Dana, before I get to my last question for you, I do want to give you the space to share, if people have really been pulled to your love, your voice, your message today, where can they find you? I know you mentioned you have your own podcast. What do you wish to promote and share with my audience?
Well, my podcast is called Phoenix and Flame, and it's on iTunes and Spotify and Deezer and all those places. The website is phoenixandflame.com. And right now, as of today, when we're recording this, it's being upgraded. I'm going to be offering an online boundaries course because I've been called the queen of boundaries.
Oh, love it.
And a quiz where people can take it to figure out, do I have boundary issues? I don't know. And they can take the quiz, they can take the course. So I'm really excited about things that are going to be up and coming, that it's kind of like a work in progress right now with a lot of things. It's kind of like a house that's being remodeled and there's like sawhorses everywhere and stuff, but it's really going to be awesome.
Beautiful. I love it. And as always, beautiful listeners, I'll put all of Dana's links to that, to her show and everything she's discussed today in the show notes. So you can just click your details and you'll see everything there. Dana, my last question for you as we wrap up here is, this is the Cosmic Love Antenna. And I really set the intention of having conversations around coming back to this mystical heart space and love space we have inside of us. And we've talked about a lot today through the context of internal family systems. But I'm wondering, in your world, my friend, personally, how do you define that love word?
I define that as seeing a person from their heart, looking past all of the superficial stuff, looking past how much education they have or don't, what they do for a job, what kind of clothes they're wearing, what color their skin is, what their sexuality is. Look past all that. Look to their heart. Look to their heart. Connect your heart to their heart. And when you can do that, oh my gosh, we can have all these wonderful connections and love each other and stop being so divisive. And instead see how we can come together and what we have in common. We have so much more in common than we have that divides us.
I felt your heart beating strong in those words, my friend. Thank you for spending time with me today. Thank you for sharing your love with me. Beautiful listeners out there in the podcast world, thank you for giving us your ears, your attention, your time. We hope this brought you value and guidance. If it did, please share it far and wide. But until next time here on the Cosmic Love Antenna, we wish you love, we wish you light, and we'll see you very soon. Bye, everyone. Before I leave you today, beautiful beings, I'm so excited to share a special announcement just with you. On the 20th to the 23rd of April, 2023, I and a fellow guest of the show, the beautiful Ali Paws, will be hosting live in Tulum, Mexico, the Cosmic Heart Tour. And I have Ali here with me now in this moment. Ali, I wanted to ask you from my heart to yours, why should the beautiful souls listening come and join us in Mexico?
Well, when I hear Tulum, Mexico, well, I guess it's a yes for me, no matter what, because I feel like a lot of us in the last, it's been a couple years since we've been through this traumatic, whatever you want to call it. And also those in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly Canada, has really long, hardcore winters, and it can be cold and lonely. And I think a lot of us are craving this community and this healing, sacred space and travel. I haven't traveled in so long. So the fact that we met on Clubhouse like 2 years ago, and the people listening to us in our rooms, our events, have now connected with us, and we have the opportunity to meet and share our gifts together in a beautiful place in Tulum, Mexico, is unbelievable to me. I'm just to the moon. So there's a lot of different reasons. Those are what I'm excited about, as well as being able to share what I call my medicine that has helped me, which is the yoga, the meditation, the craniosacral, and our book that we're birthing. So I think there's a lot of little gifts and nuggets people can get from this experience. I've been doing retreats since 2014, and this healing immersive experience I know the power behind them. I know what goes into them. I know what people get out of them. So I'm just excited for whoever's coming, really. I mean, I'm excited to be actually facilitating something live because I've been doing everything online. And the fact that I can be with you, my dear friend, I'm ecstatic about it.
So I invite you to join us in Mexico. Join us for some meditations, activations, yoga, craniosacral therapy, a book release, a live Q&A, poetry, and so much more. These spots are going to fill up super quick because our intention is to make this exclusive and intimate. So please DM me Cosmic Heart Tour on any of my social channels. That's Cosmic Heart Tour on any of my social channels, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and we'll book in a meeting so you can join the love. I'm so excited to connect with you in the flesh. Thank you for listening to the Cosmic Love Antenna with me, your host, Harrison. If you gained value or this episode hit your heart, please remember to share this out with a friend, a family member, or a lover. You can also leave your love over on Apple reviews and Spotify star feedback, and this helps me spread my frequency to more souls in need. Finally, if you want to connect with me deeper, want to reach out, interested in coaching, please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Harrison Meagher, spelled Meagher. Sending you so much love.